Chapter 38. The Lion and the Hyena. March 23rd, I arrived at the Rosemont Horizon in Chicago at about 10 a.m. for WrestleMania 13. Vince had just let Stone Cold in on my heel turn and our role reversal, and he and I sat on the ring apron blankly staring at each other. Steve appeared anxious about how we'd go about telling our respective stories. I started tossing out ideas, and together we began piecing our match together. I told him if my new heel turn was going to seem for real, we had to go toe-to-toe right off the bell, onto the floor, over the barricade and up into the stands. Such an approach would make it all feel like a shoot. The fans would be close, so we'd have to keep our work tight. I looked him in the eye and said, "What would really make this a great match would be for you to get a little juice." Steve uneasily admitted that he'd never done that before, but he offered to try. There was too much at stake for him to start practicing at WrestleMania. "Steve, I'd be the first guy to tell you never to let anyone cut you, but in this situation you're going to have to trust me. I'll do it right." Steve quickly conceded that if we were going to get away with it, I'd better be the one to do it. The plan was that he was going to pass out in the sharpshooter but never submit, and we both needed to figure out the best way to do that. I smiled at Steve and said, "Have you ever seen the scene in that movie One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest where Jack Nicholson's character tries to pull that heavy, bolted down sink out of the floor and throw it out the window so he can escape the nut house and go watch the World Series? You want him to succeed so badly, but as hard as he tries, he simply can't. That was the scene that made him, and that's what we're going to do with you." Steve was relying on me because he knew he could trust me. Vince had finally hired Ken Shamrock, a move I had suggested, and he was going to referee our match, lending the credibility he brought with him as champion of the brutal world of Ultimate Fighting. As I came out like a lion, Steve was pacing the ring like a pissed-off hyena. I really felt like I was going out to have a fight after school with a kid I hated. I got a strong cheer, but there were enough angry signs and boos for me to see that my days as a babyface were truly over. Steve tackled me full force when I came through the ropes, and the bell clanged. As we brawled up the stands, I took a hard smack into the hockey boards, and Steve took a backdrop from an attempted piledriver right onto the cement steps. I remember this part of the fight in slow motion. Shocked, amused, and angry fans leapt and yelled all around us. The cheering was so loud I couldn't hear a thing. My fists bounced perfectly off Steve's head, and he never stopped fighting back. Ken Shamrock, wearing a sleeveless zebra-striped referee shirt, looked amazed at how close our work was, and how totally believable. I eventually derailed Steve and started to work his leg. I dragged him over to the corner, dropped out to the floor and slapped on my figure four around the post. Steve sold it like I was breaking his legs. I let go and nonchalantly grabbed the ring bell, then left it on the apron as if it was a weapon abandoned while I sought a better one. Like a cool killer I grabbed a chair, but it was padded, so I put it down and picked up a metal one. I could see Julie and the kids in the front row. Beans was covering her eyes, sitting next to a grim Stu and a startled Helen. I prepared to break Stone Cold's ankle, as the fans remembered he'd done to Pillman a few months earlier, by methodically threading his shin bone through the back of the chair and stomping on it. I climbed up to the top corner to jump off and cripple him, but Steve was up to greet me and smacked me across the back with the chair, knocking me to the mat. While I was on all fours, he cracked the chair across my back again, leaving me writhing and twitching in the ring. My heel turn was in motion. Vince, commentating with Lawler, announced to the masses watching on Live pay-per-view, "What excuse will Bret Hart come up with this time?" Then Stone Cold attempted to put the sharpshooter on me as Lawler said, "Wouldn't that be the greatest thing of all time? For Bret Hart to submit to his very own hold?" Steve had put the sharpshooter on wrong, and I raked his eyes, breaking the hold, fighting back with a hard gut punch. I took off into the ropes, but he sidestepped me and threw me out to the floor. I spat out the blade from where it was tucked between my upper lip and gum. As we slugged it out on the floor, I said, "It's time." I faintly heard him say, "Maybe we shouldn't." I reversed his throw and told him, "It's too late." I hurled him crashing hard into the timekeeper, and he barreled into the steel barricade. I calmly stepped over Steve, with Vince looking right at me and screaming fans only inches away. I grabbed his head and beat him with my fists like rubber hammers. Then I cut him perfectly, less than a half-inch long and as deep as a dime slot. No one saw a thing. The blood spurted out of his head as I gave him a serious thrashing. Despite all the vicious attacks he'd put me through, the crowd was now cheering for him as he fought to hang on. I retrieved the chair I discarded earlier and repeatedly smashed him in the knee, like I was bent on destroying him. I was actually doing the best I could to hit his knee brace every time. I managed to beat the bloody but defiant Austin back to a corner, but like a school bully with his back against the wall, he kicked me full force in the balls. A total work? I clutched my crotch and sank backward. The tide had just turned. Now a furious Stone Cold did all he could to put the Hitman away. The crowd seemed torn between us at times, but when he suplexed me off the top corner into the ring, Steve had the fans totally behind him. After 20 minutes we went into the finish, but Steve threw me out on the wrong side of the ring. I needed to be near the bell I'd left on the apron. Steve went for the mic cord, while I subtly maneuvered to where I needed to be. He quietly sighed with relief that I'd fixed the mistake, and as I leaned against the ropes from outside on the ring apron, he came from behind me and wrapped the mic cord around my neck several times, pretending to choke the life out of me. I sank to my knees, gasping and struggling, then grabbed the ring bell, desperately smashing the top of Steve's bald, bloody head. I untangled the cord from around my neck to find Steve, flat on his back. It was time for this son of a bitch to pay. Twisting him into my sharpshooter, I wrenched backward with all I had. Blood gushed out of his forehead, but Stone Cold refused to give in and somehow found the will to resist me. The crowd joined with him in one long, groaning gasp. He slowly forced me to topple to the mat, but could he kick out of the hold that had never failed me? No. The Hitman held on with unyielding determination. The fans cheered him on, but like Jack Nicholson in Cuckoo's Nest, he just could not lift that sink. When I steadied myself on my feet and clamped the sharpshooter on even tighter, I broke every heart that Stone Cold had just won. In the end, Austin didn't submit but was rendered unconscious. Shamrock stopped the match and raised my hand. The bell sounded. I coldly began to attack his knees, then stepped into the sharpshooter to give him some more, but before I could, Shamrock gripped me around the waist and threw me down hard to the mat. I was right back up and furious, with the taste of blood on my lips, and Ken and I squared off with fists clenched. He challenged me to bring it on, and the Chicago crowd came unglued. For him the seed was sown for some other day. As for me, I stood alone but defiant, proud and unbowed, that remorseless pink soldier on his dark bloody battlefield. As I dropped to the floor, signs danced in my face. Brett who? And go back to Canada. But kids still pulled out the front of their Hitman shirts as they high-fived me to show me that they were with me. I touched hands of support that reached out, but one frothing at the mouth, irate fan gave me the middle finger. I thrust one right back and mouthed, "Fuck you too." I loved it. The match. Everything. If I ever wanted my fans to remember just one picture of me, it would be that moment, as I was walking back to the dressing room. As I headed past Taker, he smiled and said, "Hell of a match, man, not a chance in hell me and Sid are ever gonna top that." He said this respectfully, from one worker to another. I was numb with pride as I waded into my fellow wrestlers to handshakes and praise. When Steve came in, we shook hands as he beamed, all the while pretending to be upset about his cut head. In the Wrestling Observer, Dave Meltzer wrote, "It was expected to be a one-man show. And fortunately for the name WrestleMania, the one-man delivered to match of the year caliber. Hart and Steve Austin more than saved the show with a match phenomenal in work rate, intensity, and telling the story." The next day Vince pulled me into his office as soon as I got to the Rockford Civic Center and asked me whether Steve and I had taken it upon ourselves to juice. Steve had denied it. So did I. Vince never said another word to me about it. Then he asked me whether I was ready to give the interview of my life, and told me the points he wanted me to cover. The setup had begun the week before WrestleMania, when Vince had encouraged me to go berserk on camera and curse him out over the injustices I'd suffered, then shove him violently to the mat. He promised that they'd use the 3-second delay to edit out my curse words, but they didn't bleep out a thing, and my crazed bout of rage had gone out everywhere except Canada, where the show didn't air live. The interview I was to do that night would turn out to be the longest in the history of the business to that time, a 22-minute live rant that I think was the best of my career. I wore black gear with a new black leather jacket that signaled my intentions. It had a menacing skull framed with a pink triangle on the back. None of the fans would have ever guessed that the illustration was originally drawn by Jerry Lawler as a possible logo for the Hitman hockey team. I started by apologizing to my fans all over the world for the foul-mouthed outbursts they'd witnessed. And then I took a deep breath thinking, here we go, this is it. To my fans across the United States of America, to you I apologize for nothing. No matter how much I try to win, when I walk back to the dressing room, you treat me like I've lost. Even though Stone Cold lost, you cheer him as though he won. You cheer on a pretty boy like Shawn Michaels. You let him screw me out of the World Wrestling Federation belt, but the WWF needed a hero, a role model, not somebody with earrings and tattoos posing for a girly magazine, which is actually a gay magazine. I thought I had a calling to come back and set the record straight and clean up the WWF, so I did. I came back and beat Steve Austin at Survivor Series. When I had my first chance to win the belt back, against Psycho Sid, Shawn Michaels interfered and cost me the belt. Nobody cared. But then I was told, don't worry, you can fight 29 other guys in the Royal Rumble, and if you win that you'll get a title shot at WrestleMania. 29 guys later I won. I was the last legal man standing, but somehow it's justified that Steve Austin won. Gorilla Monsoon and Vince McMahon begged me not to quit. To think of my fans. So I did. I was told if I won the Final Four I'd get a title shot at WrestleMania. Sounds good to me. I accept. I come back. All of a sudden, your champion, your hero, Shawn Michaels, comes up with this life-ending, career-ending injury and forfeits the title so he can go back and find his smile. You talk about me crying, I saw everybody crying in the audience for that one. I've got one thing on my mind after being screwed over by everybody in the WWF, and being abandoned by all you good fans across the United States. I decide I'm going to go into this submission match and give Steve Austin exactly what he deserves. A good old-fashioned ass-whipping. So when I do it, when I take that dirty, rotten, stinking hyena, Steve Austin, and beat him to a bloody pulp, you find it in your hearts to abandon me and cheer for him. Most of the fans in the arena stood in stunned silence, not quite able to absorb what was happening. But there were those Hitman fans so loyal to me they believed that I had every right to feel the way I did because the WWF had, in fact, screwed me, and they were just as sick of it as I was. In their minds, I was addressing the segment of the American wrestling audience that had changed, and they hadn't. So they actually supported my heel turn. Lawler defended me too. So to stress to the TV audience that I was now, in fact, a bad guy, Vince proclaimed, "Poison is spewing from Bret Hart," as they cut to a sign that read, "Bret, get a life." Hatred seemed to burn from my eyes as I ranted on along the lines Vince had suggested. I've proven myself so many times here in the WWF. I've tried to be everything you wanted me to be. But it seems to me you don't seem to understand what it means to have dignity, poise, to bring prestige, to be a man that brings a little class, because you'd rather cheer for heroes like Charles Manson and O.J. Simpson. Nobody glorifies criminal conduct like the Americans do. All the other countries I go to around the world still respect what's right and what's wrong. Contemptuously, I sneered, respect, and took a deep breath, diving in past the point of no return. Now that we've made everything really clear with ourselves here tonight, it's obvious to me that all you American wrestling fans from coast to coast, you don't respect me. Well, the fact is, I don't respect you. You don't deserve it. So from here on in the American wrestling fans can kiss my ass. And then Shawn appeared at the top of the ramp and made his way to the ring so we'd be face to face, as he had his turn. Yo, Hitman. Nobody knows better than me. You have to have a handwritten note from the Lord Almighty to get the belt from you. I've tried and tried to take the high road. Now, Bret, I'm in no shape to wrestle. I know you're tougher than me. Blah blah blah. I admit that. That's fine. I don't have to be number one. I don't obsess like you do. I do this 'cause I like it. You do it because in your mind, Hitman, you really think all of this is yours. What you need to understand, every time these fans reach into their pockets to watch you, me, or anybody else, they have the right to cheer or boo anybody they want. Now, you don't have to tell me they're cheering me now, but they booed me before. But you didn't see me get all bent out of shape. At that moment, one lone disgusted fan shouted out to Shawn, "You are a liar." Shawn went on to tell me all about the First Amendment. I don't want to get on my high and mighty roller coaster. Bret, my friend, you want to go? Let's go. We've got a saying in the United States of America. It's called America, love it or leave it. Boy toy, I said, go back to the dressing room. Just get the hell out of my face. How do you know I was in that gay magazine? You just had to flip through the pages, didn't you? The crowd popped. Shawn turned his back on me to play up to the fans. Quick as a cat I came from behind and went straight for his supposedly injured knee. I dragged him to the nearest corner, dropped out and slapped on my figure 4 on the post. As realistic as both our interviews were, we were both still working. He protected me by holding my foot so I could ease myself to the floor without whacking my head, which was the only dangerous part about putting that hold on. Shawn's response was as carefully scripted by Vince as my rant was. He was a master puppeteer playing with a couple of marionettes. March 25th, we taped Raw in Peoria, to air the following Monday. That night Owen and I concluded our 3-year war, fulfilling the promise we made to each other when we started our brother against brother angle. Davey and Owen had a rematch for the European title, even though they were still the reigning WWF Tag Team Champs. In the heat of their battle, I suddenly hit the ring and broke up the fight, like a big brother dealing with a couple of unruly younger siblings. I restored order long enough to get to a mic, and then launched into a monologue about family values. Angry fans booed me, But I appealed directly to Owen and Davey. What are you fighting for? Americans don't understand family, they've based their entire history on brother against brother. When they tore into each other again, I got between them and broke it up, pleading with Davey. We fought each other at Wembley Stadium. We fought like two men and we hugged each other when it was over. He appeared to be moved by my words, especially as I pointed out how Diana had been used to drive a wedge between us. I turned at long last toward Owen, my embittered little brother. Who was there for you more times than I was? I pleaded with Owen, whose eyes glistened bright as his lower lip quivered in an Academy Award-winning performance. Despite the boos, I could see fans in the front row beginning to tear up too. Americans don't understand family. Davey, Owen, I'm asking for your help. Owen, look me in the eye. Hear me loud and clear, I don't care about these people. Owen, I love you. Tears streamed down Owen's face as he fell into my arms. The three of us embraced in the middle of the ring as the arena rained boos down on us. As Owen tousled Davey's flat top, I nearly cracked up, but I was able to glare coldly into the camera with chilling hate for all those who opposed us. The new Hart Foundation was born. Later in the show, Stone Cold did an in-ring interview with a white bandage covering the tiny cut on his forehead, seething about how he never said, "I quit." I appeared on the giant screen telling him he just got his butt kicked by the real king of the jungle, and that I was finished with him. He hotly fired back, "No you're not. You'll have to kill me to be finished with me." That night had one more wrinkle. I was slated by the booking committee to challenge Rocky Maivia for the Intercontinental title, and Hunter was insisting I beat him. I didn't see any need for me to beat Rocky, didn't build heat for my new heel turn, and would only undermine a real talent. I insisted on a DQ instead, which infuriated Hunter. He and Shawn disliked Rocky intensely and were too myopic to see that Rocky was destined to become one of the all-time greatest megastars in the history of the business, The Rock. Looking back, I'm glad I got to work with him at least once. Our match was nice, quick, simple. In the end, I pulled his legs out from under him in the corner, slid out under the bottom rope and locked him into the figure four around the post. Several referees later I still hadn't released the hold and was disqualified. Stone Cold charged out to save Rocky, but he was bushwhacked by Owen and Davey, and I joined in by pulling Stone Cold's shirt over his head, like I'd done to Shawn, and then pretended to beat him senseless. The Legion of Doom came to the rescue, squaring off with Owen and Davey, just as Steve battled back. In a rare act of cowardice, the Hart Foundation fled over the barricades and into the crowd to a chorus of boos. It was working. Every night now hostile fans waited outside the buildings for my arrival. I was finding out that the one thing that pissed off wrestling fans more than anything else was to attack their patriotism. By the time I got to the ring, I was covered in gobs of spit, coins, drinks and garbage dangerously bounced off my head as fans cursed and pelted me. It reminded me of the kind of heat Sergeant Slaughter had when he wore Saddam Hussein's boots during the Gulf War. After the shows I needed a police escort to get out of town. Even then, I often found myself speeding to outrun fans who chased me, hanging out their car windows, shaking shotguns and half-empty beer bottles while trying to run me off the road. After 6 days at home at the beginning of April, I took off on 2 foreign tours, to South Africa and then to Kuwait. Promoters in both places demanded that Undertaker and I headline their shows or they'd cancel the sold-out tours, and though the dates overlapped, we both agreed to do double duty as a sign of our commitment to Vince during his time of financial struggle. Before I left I got an unexpected call from Eric Bischoff to say that he'd been blown away by my match with Steve. He wanted me to know that if things didn't work out with Vince, the door was always open for me at WCW. My flight from Calgary to South Africa was the most luxurious trip I ever took, and that's saying something. I could truly say to myself that this is what it felt like to be a superstar. I made my connection in Heathrow, where I checked into a room at the Hilton right at the airport, which was included as part of my ticket. I enjoyed a comfy 8-hour sleep before boarding a British Airways flight direct to Cape Town. I dined on roast shoulder of lamb and slept flat in an egg-like seat that curled out like a bed. I felt so rested when I landed that I rented an Aston Martin and took off from the airport to find the hotel where I'd hook up with the rest of the WWF crew. Driving through Cape Town, the rolling clouds tumbled over Table Mountain and my heart beat contentedly in my chest. How could I know this would be my final world tour as a wrestling hero? How could anyone know, but for a handful of conspirators who met behind closed hotel room doors in the wee hours, long after the fans had gone home, long even after the boys had gone to sleep. I spent the following day on a sightseeing drive around the Cape, thinking about how desperately I wanted to get home for good. Taking inventory, I had to admit that the aches and pains never went away anymore. There was increasing stiffness in my joints, and I could barely bend my right wrist at all, as much from working out on the weights as from wrestling. But I told myself I could still deliver that one beautiful story of a character who always stayed true to himself and fought hard for what he believed in, and who had a fierce loyalty to those who, in turn, believed in him. That night I drove to the building unsure whether my loyal Cape Town following was up to speed on the new storyline. I strode out to a huge pop, waving a South African flag. The Cape Town fans ate it up. Of course, the sight of me flaunting the South African flag on Raw was intended to heat up the American audience even more. That night, and for the rest of that blur of beautiful little towns, Taker and I had some great matches. It was important for him to always be the monster, which allowed me the opportunity to save face and stride out to the ring every night as a good and steady hero. Those few days in Africa have endured for me as lasting memories of a vanishing time in a business that was drastically changing. I was tanned and refreshed when Taker and I arrived in Kuwait on April 8th to hook up with a completely different crew. Owen and Davey had just come from a live Raw in Muncie, Indiana, and they told me about an in-ring shoot interview Sean had done that was so over the line they were both livid on my behalf. I didn't realize the full impact of it until I called my friend Marcy, who was so pissed off about the interview and disappointed in Sean that she played the whole 18-minute rant to me over the phone. Sean started off level enough, talking about how I'd put him in the figure 4 around the post a couple of weeks before and he wasn't going to say when he'd be back in action. After that, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Remember, this was a time when pro wrestlers didn't go on TV to speak openly about the business or what happened behind the curtain. You spoke only about a guy's wrestling character, not his character as a person. Here's Sean. Everyone is asking, why is Bret Hart all of a sudden a bad guy? Well, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, I'm not gonna lie to you. Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels loathe one another. Whether it be out here or back there, make no mistake about it. Bret Hart hates my guts. And to be perfectly honest, I hate his. Now, we're gonna take the gloves off here. Bret Hart has not just recently turned into a bad guy, he has always been a bad guy. He comes out here and he talks about how the World Wrestling Federation exploited his family. Well, I've got news for you, ladies and gentlemen. Bret Hart is the one that asked his mother and his father to be on TV. Bret Hart is the one that drags his sister and his children out on TV. The World Wrestling Federation exploits Bret Hart's family because he allows it, and the reason he allows it is very simple, for Bret Hart's own financial gain. If Bret can make a buck, he'd sell his mother. That's the truth. Shawn was only just getting warmed up. Bret Hart has an obsession with Shawn Michaels and the World Wrestling Federation Championship. Last year I won the World Wrestling Federation Championship fair and square. But I want to digress to 6 years ago. When Shawn Michaels first started his singles career and became the Intercontinental Champion, that's when Bret Hart also became the World Wrestling Federation Champion. I ran support to him. I told everybody, including himself and his family, that I supported him. And I was second fiddle to Bret Hart for years here, and I did it with a smile on my face, because that's what a man does when it comes to business. But then, when it came for Bret Hart to return the favor, oh yeah, he did it, but he did it kicking and screaming every inch of the way. And then, Bret Hart takes time off, he says, 'cause he needs rest. What he did was take time off to see if Shawn Michaels and the World Wrestling Federation would fall flat on their face without him. Well, guess what? We didn't fall face flat anywhere. As a matter of fact, the World Wrestling Federation did the best business it has done in 6 years. Then Shawn turned to Vince, who'd been standing silently beside him all this time. "You're the boss? Am I right or wrong?" Vince smirked as he replied, "You're right." What else could Vince say at that moment, with Shawn on a roll on live TV? But the fact is that when I began my first title reign, the WWF was in the midst of the steroid and sex scandals, and business dropped off because of negative press, not because I was champion. In fact, I carried the championship during the darkest days in WWF history, and any wrestler who was there at that time knows that. Vince knows that, I told myself. Shawn carried on. Bret Hart, he sat in Calgary and passed judgment on Shawn Michaels, and he told everybody about my faults. And believe me folks, I have got a truckload of faults. But I have never ever lied about that to any one of you. He talked about my dancing. How could the fans of the World Wrestling Federation cheer a wrestler who dances? Who has long hair? Who pierces his navel? Who has tattoos? How could the fans of the World Wrestling Federation support something like that? Well, it's real simple, they like it, you idiot. But every one of those comments I made was about his ring character, not about him as a person. If I'd been taking personal jabs at Shawn Michaels, I'd have talked about how he was a drug addict and how insecure and neurotic he was, and I never did. As for the fans, Male WWF fans left for WCW in droves when Shawn got the belt. And Bret Hart talks about his loyalty to his WWF fans. And that's ultimately what made him return to the World Wrestling Federation. Well, that is a load of horseshit. The reason Bret Hart returned to the World Wrestling Federation, after using a rival organization against this man and the company that made him what he was, he stabbed the World Wrestling Federation in the back. For his financial gain, Bret Hart did not come back to the World Wrestling Federation for his fans. He came back for the almighty dollar. Hogan, Roddy, Razor, Diesel, Kid and even Kurt Hennig had all abandoned Vince's sinking ship. I stayed loyal to him and to the WWF and walked away from $2.8 million a year to take Vince's proposed $1.5 million. But did Vince say that? Now we're all wondering, why are you obsessed with the World Wrestling Federation Championship? I'll tell you, I wanted to be the World Wrestling Federation champion since I was a little kid. It was a dream. Bret Hart is obsessed with the World Wrestling Federation Championship because he was born into it. If Bret Hart wasn't a world champion, he would feel like he had fallen short. When he goes home to Calgary, he is still Bret the Hitman Hart, former World Wrestling Federation champion. Shawn Michaels, when he goes home, he's not the Heartbreak Kid. He's not Shawn Michaels. He's just plain old Shawn. Bret, you're the Hitman 24 hours a day. And the reason for that is Bret Hart cannot separate all of this from his real life. That's why he brings his family in it, and that's why he brings his friends in it. Bret Hart is obsessed with being in the limelight more than I could ever possibly imagine. Bret Hart, your obsession with me and the World Wrestling Federation Championship will ultimately be, and I want you to read my lips, it will ultimately be your destruction. Marcy told me that when Shawn was done, he took his suit jacket off to do his Chippendale dance and humped Vince's leg. I called Carlo, and he said he didn't like the interview either. Carlo was in such a full panic, fearing for his job and not trusting a soul, that I had to shout into the phone to calm him down. Next I called Vince. Without a moment's hesitation he told me that Shawn's behavior was inexcusable and that Shawn would be dealt with. Thinking back on it now, I am astonished that I believed him. No one just went off like Shawn had done on a TV rant without Vince orchestrating every bit of it. I guess I just wanted to believe him. I asked him again whether he had any problem with our contract, and he reiterated that he didn't. I reminded him that I'd turned down a hell of a lot of money to stay loyal to the company, and that this was something Shawn should know. He agreed. How could Shawn have forgotten that I put that torch right in his hand? The Kuwait tour offered some relief and distraction. Owen and I had the privilege of spending a day and a half with the 7th Cavalry Regiment Gary Owen Tank Division. The soldiers took us for a helicopter flight out to Camp Doha on the Kuwait-Iraq border, where we sat down to a hearty meal with all the soldiers in the mess tent, including the general. The chaplain, Corporal Ken Sorensen, who was a dead ringer for Father Mulkey on MASH, told me the men loved to watch wrestling. Many of the soldiers said they couldn't believe we'd come all the way out there to visit them. They drove us in a Bradley tank to remote outposts where sentries stood guard. What impressed me most about these soldiers was their guts and their fear. They had the guts to take on anyone, and they lived with the fear of knowing they might have to at any moment. I found the camaraderie of these men not very different from the camaraderie between the wrestlers. In the army they need to trust and respect one another and support each other, whether they like each other or not, which was no different than the bond between wrestlers working in the ring. As we were leaving, the general told us our visit had been great for morale, and I told him, ours as well as yours. On the ride back to the base, Owen, Davey and I found ourselves flying through an azure blue sky over golden desert sands in an open military helicopter, happy to be alive and bound by our optimism that the New Heart Foundation would really get over. As a parting gift, the chaplain handed me a coin with an inscription that read, "The angel of the Lord encamps around those who fear him and he delivers them." Psalm 3:4-7. The men of the 7th Cavalry gave me a Gary Owen pin. From that day on, even as I bashed American wrestling fans, I proudly wore the pin on my ring jacket as a way of letting them know how I really felt about Americans. On April 11th, Vader made the mistake of going bonkers on Good Morning Kuwait. He and Taker were appearing together on the show and had been warned in advance that the host was going to ask them the predictable question about pro wrestling: is it fake? Taker diplomatically answered that wrestling is entertainment with athleticism thrown in. But Vader had worked a lot in Japan, where pro wrestling was still taken very seriously as a shoot, and where wrestlers put a scare into talk show hosts all the time. So Vader grabbed the host by his tie and threw him down backward over some chairs and a table, swearing that such questions were bullshit. He was immediately hauled off to jail and threatened with 3 months incarceration, mostly because it was illegal in Kuwait to swear on TV. Despite Vince's efforts to get Vader out, for a time the authorities wouldn't budge. They finally settled on house arrest at the hotel. When I finally saw Vader again, he looked like a big, bad dog, who tore up the fence. As much as the business had changed in the 12 years since the David Schultz and John Stossel fiasco, some things never change. On my second to last night of the tour, carried a Kuwait national flag out to my match with Taker, which was being taped to air on TV back home. I ducked under him, like I'd done so many times before, but caught my boot in the canvas and felt something snap in my right knee, like a small fan belt breaking. I limped slightly for the rest of the match and right through to the following night, when the vocal crowd popped as I defeated Stone Cold in the final to win the Kuwaiti Cup. When I got back home, I was gratified to read in the Wrestling Observer on April 21st. Reality break, folks. It goes without saying that in the ring Michaels did a super job in 1996, however, let's not rewrite history to say Shawn's reign was Hogan-like from a business standpoint, because nothing could be further from the truth. TV ratings collapsed in June of 1996 on Shawn's watch, not Brett's, and reached company all-time lows for the rest of the year. Not just Monday night ratings due to Nitro, ratings across the board. Syndication died. Shawn's work in the ring can't be denied, but the buy rates fell through his reign, and it was during Shawn's reign, for the first time in a decade, the WWF in both PPV and TV ratings fell to number 2 in the US, and when it came to house shows, while WWF had a strong year in 1996, its best months were February and March, and who was champion at that point? The summer was good, but there was a serious decline in the fall, at which point Vince threw everything he could to get Brett back, including promising him the belt. Let's not forget that there were numerous cases of Michaels throwing unprofessional hissy fits throughout his title reign in the ring. I was still deeply hurt and pissed off though, and had no idea what to do about it.